Ambassador Joe Manso has been a diplomatic public servant for almost 40 years. He has represented the U.S. and NATO, the UN, and was our ambassador to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. He served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization Affairs and has been stationed in Iraq, Mexico, Bolivia, and Spain. He is an expert in geopolitical affairs, the military, and law enforcement, and was a faculty member at the National War College, which I can't wait to ask about. There are so many other titles and lots of important words that I don't have time to list at the moment, and we're thrilled to have you on the Foreign Report to hear your perspective on the very boring first 100 days of President Trump's administration. Ambassador Manso, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Well, let's get started a little bit on your background, because I don't think people know about how you become an ambassador to something other than a country. And so, can you explain a little bit how you became an ambassador? And did you donate to the Trump campaign? Did you send millions of dollars over that way?
No, I've not donated to any campaign. U.S. ambassadors are either career foreign service officers or they are political appointees. All ambassadors are appointed by the president, but historically the balance has been about 2/3 of ambassadors have been career officers, and 1/3 have been political appointees. And the way you become a foreign service officer, which is the career officer for U.S. diplomats, is you take an exam. So that's what I did. A long time ago, I sat for the Foreign Service exam. It comes in two parts, a written part and an oral part. And if you pass the exam, you're offered a position in the Foreign Service, which I accepted. I had been practicing law in New York, and I thought, I wanted to try my hand at something more interesting. I thought I'd do it for 5 years. I did it for over 35 years. I do have about 40 years of federal service because I worked a couple of years for the U.S. courts as well. So that's my 40 years. But 38 years, a little more than 38 years with the State Department.
That's incredible. And you've done so much. You've been in the service of I think we should thank you for your service, especially since you haven't donated to a political campaign.
Yes, you did the old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
a meritocracy.
Yeah, you worked your way up. Oh, my God. Someone should send you a memo about that. Well, you were a faculty member at the War College, and I remember when I first heard this, I forgot we had a place called the National War College. Tell me about isn't that a little weird? We have a place called the War College.
You can play with the name, but the bottom line is the United States has a very good view that military officers should not just have training, which is, how you do things, but they should have professional military education, which is a little bit more how you think about these things, how you think about strategy, how you work with other government departments, what are the elements of diplomacy as well as of strategy. And that's why you always have some career diplomats on the faculty of the National War College. So the students of the National War College are Army colonels and Air Force colonels and Navy captains who want to ascend to a flag rank. And not everybody who goes to the War College becomes a general or an admiral, but most generals and admirals have had some professional military education.
So it's not like playing Risk or just trying to figure out how to just
Well,
play
Risk is great. I love the game of Risk, but no,
Yeah.
The War College is a whole nother thing. The War College, I think, is a good thing in the sense that it asks officers to step out of their day-to-day, box and look at things more broadly and think about things, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing. I would like them to be as educated as humanly possible. You were appointed during President Trump's first administration. You've also served under other presidents. You've been in the Foreign Service. You've been in the service of our country for a very long time. How did it differ working under the Trump administration versus the previous presidents you served under?
Okay, look, my Foreign Service Commission, first one was signed by the auto pen of Ronald Reagan. So I've seen a lot of transitions, and they can be difficult, and they can be difficult for people in the service because we are the career Foreign Service officer is makes an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States. And he is obligated legally and morally to serve the administration that is elected by the American people. I mean, that's your job, whether you agree with that administration or not. That's, and therefore people who liked Reagan, maybe they weren't happy with Clinton. People who liked Clinton, maybe they weren't happy with Bush. People who liked Bush, maybe they weren't happy with Obama, but they still serve to the best of their ability. That is our system. Career officers are supposed to be non-political, and this is historical. I mean, it's if you read accounts of the Kennedy administration, Kennedy thought that the State Department was full of conservative Republicans, and then you read about the Nixon administration, and Nixon thought the Foreign Service was full of wild-eyed liberals. Because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, the people in the State Department, the career officers, they have not gone through the campaign. They haven't been in the trenches with the people from the new administration. The people from the new administration have bonded together with each other. And they look at the career service and they say, well, you guys are outsiders. And we are outsiders vis-a-vis the campaign and the president's inner circle. But we are insiders vis-a-vis U.S. foreign policy and what we've been doing. We're the institutional memory of how we deal with basically everyone. I mean, the Chinese, the Russians, the Canadians, the Brazilians. I mean, there's a history with all of them, right? And the Foreign Service is part of that history. So a career officer is bound to implement the policy of an administration. Now, sometimes you feel that the policy of an administration is so contrary to your moral views that you feel you cannot. And I respect that in an officer. And when that happens, you have a choice, basically two things. One, you can resign, and some people do that. But two, you can make sure you work in an area of the administration and on a policy that you can agree with. Because very rarely is there an administration where you disagree with every aspect of every policy.
Right.
That just doesn't happen. I remember when at the end of the second Obama administration, when we had the start of the first Trump administration, day after the election, a junior officer, young officer who had never seen a presidential transition comes into my office. I was the director of NATO office in those days. And this young officer is in tears, and she wants to know if she has to resign because she knows she's not going to agree with, overall with most of what the Trump administration intends to do. And I asked her, I said, what's your next assignment? And she says, well, I've been assigned to Embassy London to work on cybersecurity cooperation with the British. So I told her, look, go to London. This administration is going to want to strengthen cybersecurity cooperation with the British. The next administration is going to want to do that. The administration after that is going to want to do that. This is a extremely worthwhile, important job that is, however, not particularly political. And I don't think you're going to have any problems with the administration's views on cybersecurity cooperation with the British. And indeed, she went to London and had no problems. And that was my case as well. I was nominated by the Trump administration to be ambassador to the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. As the name implies, the goal of the organization is to implement the Chemical Weapons Convention, which prohibits the manufacture and stockpiling and use of chemical weapons. So the Trump administration's policy with regard to chemical weapons was similar to basically every U.S. administration for the past 100 years, which is they were opposed to the use of chemical weapons and opposed to their manufacture.
It'd be a real problem if we had a pro-chemical weapon administration.
Right, it would be a real problem, and we didn't have it. So this is a little bit, I'm trying to give you a flavor of inside the Foreign Service, right? that just because you don't agree with everything the administration is doing, or even most things, doesn't mean you cannot be effective in implementing some policy that you do agree with.
I guess then you can, depending on what position you are, you can kind of limit your exposure to the politics of the administration. But there's got to be hot button issues that end up trickling down into the Foreign Service. And then how do you kind of navigate when those things happen? So there's there's got to be a difficulty working with a political administration, right? No matter who it is. And then you still have to combat with everything that's going on in the world as well.
Right.
What's more challenging?
Well, both. I remember when my very first assignment outside the State Department, I was sent to New York to the U.S. mission to the UN, and I was a staff aide to an ambassador whose name was Vernon Walters. And Vernon Walters was a very interesting character. He enlisted in the U.S. Army at the start of the Second World War as a private. He ended the Second World War as a colonel. He spoke fluently, something like 6 or 7 languages. He became President Eisenhower's interpreter. Later undertook a variety of diplomatic missions for presidents ranging from Eisenhower through Reagan. And he was at the ambassador to the UN when I was there as a staff assistant. And Walters used to say, the most dangerous front is the Southern Front. And by that, being in New York, he meant Washington, D.C. So he clearly thought it was harder to deal with the Washington interagency and, the ins and outs of different administrations than dealing with our foreign colleagues. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to do both. A good diplomat, and this is true of foreign diplomats as well, has to not only understand foreign countries and their cultures, he has to understand his own country, his own government, how they work, and how they reach decisions. Because you want to know not just what your position is today, particularly when you're in a negotiation. You want to know what your government's position is going to be tomorrow or the day after, because that's where the compromise is going to be. Otherwise, you're just reading the same talking points to each other and you're not getting anywhere. And the way you advance in a negotiation is you say, well, look, I know how my government works. You don't necessarily say this to the other guy, but you're saying it in your head. I know how my government works, and our position today is A. But I think if we could move to A minus, we could get a deal. And you see that also with your foreign colleagues. Some of them know that, hey, this is our position, but, if we shifted a little bit, we could probably get to a deal. And if you've got a colleague that makes an agreement and his government repudiates it, and that happens a couple of times, you realize you have a colleague that's not very useful. Whereas if he can predict where his government's going to be, and you can predict where your government's going to be, and you can find a compromise, well, then you're working at full steam.
Well, you just really set up this next question then. Can you predict where our government's going to be tomorrow, next week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe
in the next 2 hours?
Maybe
I really walked into that one because, in fact, this is a somewhat less predictable administration than most of the ones that I've worked with. Some people think that a certain amount of unpredictability is good. Your average, more cautious foreign service officer doesn't usually take that approach. Look, I always try to be an optimist when it comes to the United States. And I think the people who sell the United States short, or who think the United States doesn't have the flexibility or resilience to succeed, are often disappointed. And that's not just because of any one administration. It's because of the nature of the country and its inherent strengths, which continue, regardless of who's in the Oval Office.
Let me double click on that real quick. From your perspective, what are the inherent strengths of our country?
Oh, I think we've got a lot, from the obvious physical ones, an enormous contiguous territory,
right,
protected on 2 sides by oceans, vast natural resources, growing population, but also a very open and decentralized society, an enormous amount of creativity and resilience, a population with a wide range of views and skills that's very productive. American workers are highly productive. And, you talk a lot about manufacturing, but in fact, the dollar value of goods manufactured in the United States has not fallen. What's fallen is the number of workers needed to produce them. So there are fewer jobs in manufacturing, and that's a terrible thing for certain communities. But the actual amount of stuff that we manufacture continues to be enormous. And to be roughly the same percentage of the world's manufacturing than it was in 1980. We're at 20 or 25% of world production. So we just do it with fewer workers. So the United States is a tremendously flexible and resilient country that has also had a very flexible and adaptive government as well. So selling the U.S. short thus far has been a losing game.
What I didn't hear there, though, if I may challenge a bit, were
Sure.
due process and checks and balances. Would you include that in there?
Look, I include the strength of our government.
Right.
Its professionalism, its stability, its ability to adapt, and also to reflect what the people want. These are also strengths of the United States. Absolutely.
I think that's where I kind of get into this position, just, going to law school and you study all these things. And the thing I always used to say, it's definitely used to say, is that the plumbing of our democracy works really well. Is that the courts and that the checks and balances. And that seems like there's a lot of plumbers working right now. It seems like the plumbers are very busy. It's really the way to put that right now. Are you still optimistic about, let me just keep going with the metaphor, are you optimistic about our plumbing?
Well, I'm optimistic about the United States as a whole.
Yeah.
And I do think that if you look back historically, we're a country with dramatic shifts. Our politics tends to go in cycles, right? So, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents, suspended habeas corpus, the most fundamental aspect of due process. And he just suspended it on presidential authority because he said, hey, we have a crisis. We've got a civil war. I'm suspending habeas corpus. And we're arresting a whole bunch of people who we suspect are secessionists. And then that suspension was lifted, after the war. We had the First World War, and then we had a scare. Anarchists were being arrested around the country. We restricted immigration. We had the Second World War, and then we had the Red Scare and the McCarthy period. We had the Vietnam War and a period of violence in our urban centers. So there have been a lot of ups and downs in internal American politics. And yet, after each internal crisis, the ship has righted itself. So I don't want to be blindly optimistic, but I do have faith in the American people and the American system that while we may be going through a period that, is challenging, this country will come through it, and we'll come through it in a way that we're stronger in the other end. Maybe we'll appreciate those rights more that we took for granted for so long because of this period.
More people will vote and everything like that. Could we bottle your optimism, sir, and sell it? I think that would be helpful because I think we all need a little bit more of it.
Well, I mean, I think the question, and I'm a fan of the media, and I'm a big consumer of the media, and I read newspapers, and I look at things online. But there is an issue, a fact of life with the media, which is they give you a snapshot of what's happening on a given day, and that's the nature of the beast. And it's their profession. It's not even a criticism. It's just a statement of fact. The news is the news, the daily news, right? And you also need, I think, to read some history and get some context and see this in a longer and bigger frame, to say that this is not the only time we've had a crisis. This is not the only time that due process has been questioned. And we've been able to surmount it in other periods and in other ways. And I hope that and believe that we'll be able to surmount it now. But that's more, I think, a point for reflection. It's not something that the Daily News is going to give you every day.
We're on with Ambassador Joseph Manso. Travis Irvine is here. I'm Sina Ghaznavi. This is the Foreign Report. We're going to take a super quick break and then come back with more of the interview. Welcome back to the Foreign Report. I'm Sina Ghaznavi, Travis Irvine in the studio. We are joined by Ambassador Joseph Manso for the interview today. I want to talk about the current State Department and Secretary Rubio. What is your take on, we just talked about, your background and also how things happen in cycles. There's a lot of transitions that happen in the world and in the country here. There's a heck of a transition happening at the State Department right now.
There is. And, there are kind of two ways to look at this. On the one hand, I would say that you can always do things better. The State Department is a big government department that has been created over years. Some parts of it, some offices and bureaus have been added at congressional by legislation, by the Congress. No one would organize, if anybody was taking out a sheet of paper and saying, let's do an org chart with a blank sheet of paper for the most efficient, best organized foreign ministry or State Department, they would not do the current organization of the State Department,
Sure.
Which, was done over a period of years in different ways with different priorities. So I think some amount of improvement at the State Department, reform, refinement, rationalization of, some of the organization is certainly overdue, and it would be a good thing. And there are a lot of preliminary reports out there as to how they might do it. You cannot really go with the accuracy of that. We don't know what the final deal is going to look like, although Secretary Rubio has announced some, more modest reforms. The thing that does concern me a little bit is the thought that we're going to have very large cuts to the State Department.
Yeah.
I mean, the State Department's about 1% of the budget. You could eliminate the whole State Department and not make a big dent in the federal deficit. And that doesn't mean that there aren't, there are some posts that are legacy posts, particularly consulates, that were established in places that were important 100 years ago, and maybe they're less important now. But the thought that we would be closing or reducing the staff in many embassies worldwide, I think is something that we should look at carefully. I mean, there are posts in Africa where our commercial officers are outnumbered by the Chinese 10-1.
Yeah. So
So how are we going to compete with them when we're so outnumbered? Yes. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's really just a follow up. Like, I'm a big fan of the soft power. I know there's a lot of problems with it, but I always thought that the State Department and the way they were able to be embedded on the ground in these places without a bunch of huge military presence, and they were able to connect with people, was a great way to show people that America, for all of its faults, is ultimately a force for good in the world, or at least trying to be. And so when we're outnumbered this way, what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, I think inevitably you're giving an advantage to our rivals, and particularly China. So if you want to compete with China, the first rule of competing is you have to show up. You have to be on the field. And if you don't show up and you don't field a team, well, then, the other guy's got an advantage. So this is what I see as the concern, right, about tremendous cuts in the State Department. Doesn't mean that you can't, with a scalpel, do certain cuts in certain consulates and say, hey, do we really need this many consulates, especially in Europe? Although the other thing is, if you're doing it to save money, understand that, hey, if you, all U.S. embassies and consulates operate in accord with local labor law. Mm-hmm. And labor laws in Europe are very generous. And if you close a consulate in Europe, it may be 10 or 20 years before you see any financial savings because of the severance payments you have to make to the local staff. So it is, as always, the financial issues are complicated, because if they were easy, hey, we would have solved this a long time ago, right? I think really you should think less in the way of reform and more in the way of strategic. What's to our strategic advantage, and how should we balance and rebalance our resources to maximize our strategic advantage? Where do we want posts? Where do we want people? And where do we need to compete?
Well, let's talk about our strategic advantage. Let's just talk about the American strategy right now. And
Right.
I know you're not, fielding calls from the administration or anything like that right now. And they're like, hey, here's the strategy. I don't know if anyone actually is fielding a call on the strategy right now. But what is the reshuffling that's happening right now? There is a strategy. I mean, it looks like maybe we're trying to isolate China by cozying up to Russia. What about the rest of the world?
Right. Look, here there are like a lot of different levels to consider, right? So one level is great power competition. Great power competition is, hey, Russia, China, maybe you add India and a few others that are coming up, and you say, how do we position ourselves in such a way that our rivals do not take advantage of us? The United States is what they call a status quo sort of power. We don't want to add a lot of, we don't want to reshuffle the world. We just want to preserve a certain amount of security and prosperity for our own people. And this is hard to do, however, because there are a lot of people who want to upend the world order, and I think the Russians have demonstrated a willingness to simply invade a neighbor and seize their territory, something that, most people for the past 70 years have regarded as unacceptable. The Chinese may be contemplating the same thing. They certainly are looking to expand their influence in their neighborhood, and they have been predatory in their economic practices. So these are challenges that the United States has to face. And then there's also how other countries in the world view the United States, and there is a reservoir of goodwill. Now, look, the U.S., people's views of the U.S. Are mixed, and that makes perfect sense. We're a big, complicated country. If you were to ask me to sum up the United States in one or two sentences, it would be very hard to do because we're very diverse, and we've had very different sorts of administrations. And people have had very different experiences with the U.S., depending on what sort of aspect of U.S. policy and what time period you're talking about. But having said that, there are a lot of people in the world who sincerely believe that the U.S. is a force for good. And I would not want to disappoint those people. I would not want to disappoint our friends. And I also think that looking at the very biggest picture, when you're in Beijing or you're in Moscow, you have two choices. If you're looking at doing something, you have two choices: do it or don't do it. If you're in Washington, you have three choices: do it, don't do it with allies. That third choice is pure gold, and it is not a choice that our biggest systemic rivals have got. And you need to take care of that so that we can preserve that third choice. And the reason we have that third choice is to a large extent because of the policies that we adopted after the Second World War, where we were very generous. Now, I understand that people in the United States are concerned that, we shouldn't be generous forever and we shouldn't be taken advantage of. And I agree with that we should most certainly not be taken advantage of, and that the United States and the State Department should be, on guard against that. But I do think that an alliances or a set of alliances that are mutually beneficial, where we put something in, but the allies also put something in, that's not being taken advantage of. That is a force multiplier for us. And we should be able to both keep the eye on the ball of competition with our big rivals, and also be able to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships. Winston Churchill, who should know, he lived it, said the only thing harder than fighting a war with allies is fighting a war without allies.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's a lot of care and feeding, and it's a pain in the neck to have allies. Was a Secretary of State that used to regard dealing with allies as gardening. It was the work you had to do. You had to, hoe the soil and pull out the weeds and do the things you have to do, the watering, to keep those alliances alive. So I'm not saying alliances don't require effort, but I am saying that if they're done properly, the effort pays off.
I don't know about you. I haven't seen anyone in the administration with a green thumb, but I could be wrong. Do you think, though, that given what you were saying, that there are people that we have friends, we have allies, and you wouldn't want to disappoint them? Are we disappointing our allies and our friends right now?
Well, I mean, you have to ask them. At the end of the day, there are different ways to approach promoting your interests. And clearly, this administration has taken what they regard as the fast way. They want to demonstrate strength. And when you demonstrate strength, you can sometimes get from people what you want. Another, aspect of this, though, that most career diplomats would point out is that if you get what you want solely by demonstrating strength, you may leave some hard feelings behind. And these transactions are not one-off deals. We have ongoing relationships where we're going to have to go back to people next year and the year after and 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and they're going to remember that we, showed strength, and maybe they would feel that they were being bullied. And that is a two-edged sword. So you may get some results in the near term, but have you created a relationship where there's a level of resentment where it will be harder for us to get something in the future? That's a question, particularly if we could have gotten some of this in a way that was more cooperative and less confrontational.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait a little while to see how angry everyone's going to be at us in the future.
We will find out.
Speaking of people that could be angry with us in the future, the administration released the Ukraine peace deal that just came out. And there's a bunch of points in there. But, I think the conventional wisdom, at the beginning of the administration was that Ukraine, whatever Trump was going to do, it was probably going to involve Ukraine losing territory. And that's what it looks like is happening here. Can you give us a sense of what your thoughts are on this peace deal? And does it help America? What are the benefits? And why does it seem like it helps Russia so much?
Okay. First, let's talk about what the U.S. interest is. There are a number of classical schools of thought on international relations. One is the realist school. It's all about hard power. Then you have the idealists, and they're all about soft power and international law. And then you have the balance of power people, that as long as you have a balance, you can maintain stability. I personally am more of the Mick Jagger school of diplomacy.
Okay.
And the Mick Jagger school of diplomacy is you can't always get what you want, but if you try, you get what you need.
Got it. Okay,
So
I was taking that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was
Ambassador Mick Jagger.
okay.
Because that's the first thing. If you don't know what you need, how are you going to get it, right?
Right.
So figuring out what your interest is the going in question. And what's our interest in Ukraine? And to be honest, whether a particular town or village is on one side of the border or the other side of the border between Ukraine and Russia is not a vital U.S. national security interest. So
Right.
this line can be drawn in different places. The U.S. interest is that the Russians should not think at the end of this process, hey, that was great, let's do it again.
Exactly.
Right.
This
They
is
have
what I
to
keep
think-
thinking they think.
Right. They have to think at the end of the process, wow, that was a close one. We're not going to do that again. That's the U.S. interest, because we want stability and we want peace. And the way you get stability and peace is you discourage and you deter the aggressors. And the Russians are aggressors.
And I guess to that point, it seems like Putin's thinking, well, that was a close one. I could probably do this
I could
again.
probably do it again, yeah.
I could probably
Well,
do
this
it
is
again.
that would be a bad outcome for the United States. Now we have to see, because at the end of the day, I think the Ukrainians have come around to the point of view that the territory that the Russians are actually occupying, they're unlikely to give up right now. But there are different ways of acknowledging that. It's one thing to say, we Ukraine acknowledge that Russian soldiers have occupied this territory. We continue to say that it's Ukrainian territory. We continue to say the Russian occupation is illegal. But we acknowledge for the moment that, hey, the Russians are in physical control of the territory. And that's on that basis, we can have a ceasefire, right? After the Second World War, Russia occupied the Baltic states, right? Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. And they physically occupied them for decades. We, the United States and many other countries, never recognized that occupation. But it was a reality for 50 years. So the Ukrainians could say, look, we understand, we recognize the reality that Russian troops have occupied this territory. We think of that as an illegal occupation, and we do not recognize Russia's rights to the territory. But we accept the fact that they've physically occupied it, because that is a reality, a fact on the ground. So if the Ukrainians do it that way, they're giving up the fact that the territory is occupied by the Russians. But it's not giving up that much, because they're not in a position to physically eject the Russians. But they're preserving their right to that territory in the future.
I see.
So that's one way to do it. And if you do it that way, I think the Ukrainians are willing to do what I've just described, which is to recognize Russia's physical occupation, but not recognize Russia's legal right to those territories.
So the people in those areas of conflict, then, the Ukrainians that are living there, are still going to be Ukrainians. They would still get their presumably public services from Ukraine?
No, they would be Russia. They would be under Russian occupation.
So
now, like East Germany,
Russian healthcare.
if they fled East Germany to West Germany, they could.
Yeah,
they were recognized by the West Germans as Germans and taken in. But if you lived in East Germany, you were getting, East German services, and the Soviet army was occupying you. So here, if the Ukrainians say the territory that's physically occupied by the Russian army is physically occupied by the Russian army, and we recognize that, we do not recognize their legal right to be there. They are preserving their rights to recoup that territory in the future, but for the present, that territory is under Russian control.
So literally the Russian government will run sanitation for that area. Like
Yes.
they're going to pick up the trash. You're going to pay
Yes.
Russian taxes now. You're going to
Right.
get a passport that's Russian, presumably.
Right.
Wow. That's
Right.
wild.
Well, it's certainly harsh, and it's not what the people in those regions wanted.
Yeah.
When Ukraine got its independence, they had a referendum saying, do you want to be independent of the Soviet Union or of Russia, as it was evolving at that time? And they did the vote by region. And every region in Ukraine voted for independence. Now, the vote for independence was by a wider margin in the western part of Ukraine, and it was by a somewhat smaller margin in the eastern part and in Crimea. But independence won in every region, including in Crimea.
Yeah.
So the majority of Ukrainians in every single region voted for independence, and their votes are now being discarded by the occupation by the Russian army.
I want to also ask, I want to move more to the now new Iran deal that
Sure.
strikingly seems similar to the original Iran deal,
Right.
including Steve Witkoff saying that the enrichment level should be at 3.67% when that was the exact number that the JCPOA did.
How'd you get that number, Steve?
Where'd you get? Did you copy and paste that number from a Signal chat, Steve? Did you use Signal, by the way?
I don't know.
No, that's
Okay,
good. All right,
good.
that's
All right,
good.
you're already doing great
You're
then.
already doing way better than most everybody over there. We're on with Ambassador Joseph Manso. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Iran deal. I'm Sina Ghaznavi, Travis Irvine. We'll be right back after this message. Welcome back. We talked a lot about the Ukraine and Russia deal, and now I wanted to get into the now Iran deal 2.0. Now, we were just kind of joking just before the break here that this deal is going to be basically what seems like similar to the original one. What's your take on how they're approaching it? We did an episode already on the show of how far the Islamic Republic of Iran has come in their nuclear development since the JCPOA was torn up in Trump's first administration. And it seems like, what's your take? Is it going to just be the same thing? What could be different about this deal versus the previous one?
Well, I think here it's also good to think about what's the U.S. objective and what do we need, right? So this goes back to the Mick Jagger, you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. What do we need? If you think what we need is to slow down the Iranian nuclear program, then JCPOA and maybe this New Deal, son of JCPOA, are perfect, because that's what they do. They slow down the Iranian nuclear program, right? If you feel that our objective has to be to stop the Iranian nuclear program, well, you can make the argument this is a step in the right direction because it slows it down, right? So slowing it down, can be seen as a first step toward stopping it entirely. But if you feel also that our objective has to be addressing destabilizing and bad Iranian behavior in the neighborhood and their support and subsidy for terrorist organizations, well, then JCPOA not only didn't do it, it actually made it worse because some of the funding that it was Iranian money, so it was their money, it was unfrozen, they got access to the money, and instead of spending it on improving the living conditions of their own population, which is what we expected them to do, they actually spent it on doubling down and increasing their support for various destabilizing groups in the region. Including Hamas and Hezbollah and support for the Assad regime and the Houthis and so on.
My whole diaspora was yelling about this deal. Every time I talked to my mother, she was yelling about the JCPOA and how it's just helping the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're just going to...
Well, this is the problem. So that's why it's a difficult problem.
Yeah.
Because a reasonable person could argue either side of this. A reasonable person could say... helping the Islamic Republic, allowing them to have access to these funds, allowing them to use these funds to destabilize the region is unacceptable. So that's one point of view. And another point of view is, well, it's unacceptable, but Iran getting a nuclear weapon is so bad that we are willing, by a narrow margin, to say the nuclear deal, we're better off with the nuclear deal than without it. And that's really the distinction.
And that's the crux of this show.
You can be a fair-minded person.
That's
and you
everything
can be on either
this show
side
is
of this
about.
argument.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What?
I was just saying that's the crux of what this show is about, is kind of living with those two conflicting ideas and trying to figure out why we're choosing one over the other. Because the entire Trump administration it was yelling about this very thing, that we enabled the Islamic Republic to fund their proxies in their axis of resistance. Right. So
now you could say the circumstances are a little different, right? The proxies have really taken a beating. The Assad regime has collapsed. Hezbollah has been really shaken up by a major Israeli offensive. And Hamas is also, has been significantly degraded by the Israeli war in Gaza. So you can argue, there are a lot of other questions with those things, but certainly no matter how you cut it, the proxies have been significantly weakened.
Yeah.
And because the proxies have been significantly weakened, you could say it strengthens the argument of those who say Okay, so now the moment is to focus on slowing down and hopefully eventually stopping the Iranian program, because the proxies are less of a threat than they were a few years ago. And I suspect, I mean, you have to ask the administration for their view, but I would suspect that that might very well be part of their thinking.
What happens when they make the same deal? What is going to
Right.
be the reaction from their own party, from their own people, when they make the exact same deal?
Right, because Trump
Well, this is-
previously called it a terrible deal,
He's going to make the
Yes,
same
and now
deal.
it's the same deal.
You know, this is politics now. Now you're beyond diplomacy and into
Sure.
politics. And at the end of the day, a deal can be a terrible deal when it's made by your political opponent, and a great deal when it's made by your guys. And that's not diplomacy, that's just politics.
Wow.
That's why.
And for that, you need somebody else. I'm not a politician.
Sure.
Well, I think one thing we can ask you about are some global power rankings. Are you ready?
Right.
Are you
Sure.
ready? Here. So, what in your head? I'm trying to think about how the United States has changed in its role in the world over the last, let's say, 15 years. And would you say that we still are? Where would you put us in the top 5? 15 years ago, and who are your top 5 15 years ago, and who are your top 5 now? And you can define power however way you want to define power.
Okay, look, I think for the reasons we discussed before, actually the United States was number 1 15 years ago and continues to be number 1 right now.
Got it.
Because we have a combination of economic power, military power, and a range of scientific and innovative resources that's hard to combine. The EU has got a tremendous economy, but is sorely lacking in military power.
That's gonna change.
Russia has tremendous military power, but has an economy that I think is actually smaller than Italy's.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the only potential rival is China, but I think China is an authoritarian regime that's also very focused on its immediate neighborhood. And unlike the United States that, we have a continental-sized country and we're protected by oceans on either side, China has something like 16 or 17 neighbors, and they have disputes with almost all of them. Or they have had border disputes with all of them. So they're in a very different position strategically. Also, the Chinese have a demographic issue. 15 years ago, the question was, will China get rich before they get old? And now we have the answer to that. They've gotten old before they got rich. They have a tremendous economy in the aggregate because they have such a huge population. But in fact, their average standard of living is not that high. Certainly in the interior, it's actually still quite low. And they have a rapidly aging population. And there is no country that has solved the conundrum of growing your economy fast while your population is aging. That just is not a thing that goes together. So I see the United States still as number 1. Now, having said that, China I would not underestimate the Chinese. They have a hardworking population. They have a centrally directed government, which gives you advantages and disadvantages. But hey, if you want to build a high-speed rail line, they get it done right away.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom can't do that.
Yeah, I was going to
can
say,
do.
unlike our wonderful state here of California.
Yeah.
So not that I would want to exchange our democracy for the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, but hey, if you want to build a train, these guys can do it fast.
I'm willing to give up a lot for this high-speed rail, but I don't know if I would go full China.
Right.
And then you've got, India coming up.
India 3?
and-
U.S.,
Pardon me?
China, India number 3? You're putting India 3?
Yeah, I
Huge
don't know
population,
if I put,
right?
It depends then on how you balance out power. But I would say that India certainly has got the most potential
Yeah.
because of their huge population, their democracy. For years they've had a bit of a protectionist approach, which has slowed their economic growth compared to China's. Europe is very prosperous and is finally beginning to spend some money on defense. So I would not rule them out. But see, that's the contrast. Europe is a status quo current power, and they might increase their military spending, but they're not going to increase their demographic slice of the world or their economic slice of the world.
I see.
Whereas India, is got a lot of potential to go up in the next 15 or 20 years. But of course, we, the United States, are in a good position because we are friendly with the Europeans and we're friendly with the Indians as well, because there's no, and then of course you've got Japan, which has got some very handy real estate from the strategic point of view. More than 15 years ago in the 80s, they were seen as the future. I think they're no longer seen as the future, but they are certainly still a significant power economically and militarily. And it's one of the reasons why when I say the U.S. has got this great third choice of being able to do things with allies, it's because we have allies like the Europeans and the Japanese and the Australians that we can, do things.
But we have this situation right now with all these tariffs happening where the United States is assuming that all of our allies and all these people are just going to try to make deals, which, by the way, I don't know if they realize how long it takes to make a trade deal. It's not like you send a few emails. It takes a very long time. But it seems like also Japan could easily just make their own local trading bloc. And
they could. I mean, from the
ICE is
Japanese point of view, the United States is the cornerstone of their security.
Yeah.
I mean, look at it from their point of view. They live in a tough neighborhood.
Yeah, North Korea.
Their neighbors include North Korea, Russia, and China.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Russia
they'd
borrowed
much
the
rather
lawnmower,
have their neighbors.
never returned it. Yeah.
You can have one type of foreign policy if your neighbors are like Sweden and Norway. If you have like Sweden and Norway as neighbors, then hey, you can have a relatively, calm foreign policy. But when your neighbors are Russia, North Korea, and China, you have to take defense seriously. And they certainly take their relationship with the United States very seriously. And it is, in fact, the foundation of their security policy. So I don't see the Japanese doing anything that would undermine their relationship with the U.S.
Okay, so and that would include maybe this trade stuff that's happening right now.
Exactly. They would try to come out with some kind of result on trade,
right,
that would not disadvantage them too dramatically economically, but would preserve their relationship with the United States.
Okay, so far power rankings I'm hearing: United States, China,
India,
EU, Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
Wow.
Russia's an army with a country attached to it. I mean, it's not a
Nice.
Oh man, sick burn.
I mean, nobody wants to be like them.
Yeah.
That's the thing that the U.S. has going for it, and that the Chinese also have going for them, is that people see our models and they see some level of success. If you're an authoritarian ruler in Africa, maybe you think, hey, that Chinese model works pretty well, and I'd like to build some fast trains myself. But for a lot of other people around the world, American society is attractive. And the level of freedom and the standard of living and the level of individual sort of choice is very nice. And people come here and they leave and they go, hey, that was pretty interesting. So bottom line, I would not rule out I still keep the U.S. number one. I do think the Chinese are serious rivals. I would put them at number two. And then I think you've got India, EU, Japan, all big players.
Wow, I didn't really think about those the last three there.
Yeah, but
All right,
it makes sense.
We're running out of time here, and so thank you so much for everything. I want to ask you just a couple more things. One, what's keeping you up at night? Are you up at night, or are you sleeping very soundly now that you're out of service?
I actually sleep very soundly.
Oh, good.
Well,
any tips?
Remember when
any
somebody
tips?
asked that question of General Mattis when he was defense secretary? He said, I sleep soundly and I keep other people awake at night. So I don't think I personally keep anybody else awake at night, but I did like his answer.
And so, but is there something out there that is worrisome to you that whether it's a more global thing or something that's happening within the administration right now? What is cause for concern, or maybe something that the show should even focus on?
Okay, let me say this: that the U.S. can only have a strong and successful foreign policy if we have a strong and successful society and government at home. Our ability to influence events around the world is directly tied to our ability to have a successful society. Mm-hmm. So what we do here has an impact in our effectiveness worldwide. So if somebody says, hey, what can any of us do to help the U.S. in terms of our foreign policy objectives, the first thing is to participate actively in American democracy and to make this as strong a country and society as we possibly can.
Wow. So from the Mick Jagger School of Thought, which I understand is a course at the National War College.
That is, yeah.
Right.
You are feeling optimistic. We are going to be a world running free, like Jumpin' Jack Flash and wild horses, as opposed to negative, like where we have to paint it black and have dead flowers.
I wouldn't have quite put it like that, but basically, yes.
Okay, good. Those are the only Rolling Stones songs I know.
We're a resilient country, and as long as Americans don't lose faith in that and keep working at our society and our government, we'll be okay.
Wow.
That's great. I think it's a great place to end.
Yeah. I mean, we are the #1 geopolitical podcast in the manosphere, but now I think we're the #1 geopolitical podcast in the mansosphere.
There we go.
I've been sitting on that one for an hour.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us on the Foreign Report.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Please come back soon. We have so many questions. I could have talked to you for so much longer. We didn't even get to chemical weapons, which I'm so which
sorry
is like
about
crazy.
that.
Because like Syria's getting rid of them, or they're getting asked.
Yeah,
to.
we're against them.
You were against them.
Okay, there you go. Got it.
Settled,
Nailed it.
Settled. Okay. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.